Hello and welcome to the Future of UX podcast. My name is Patricia, and in this episode, we are going to talk about design, research, and technology. And we will do a little deep dive in what's actually changing in research with AI. And for that, I have a wonderful guest with me, who is Julian Della Mattia. He's a senior user insights manager at DuckDuckGo, and I first came across Julian through his talk on synthetic users at a conference last year, and it immediately stuck with me. Not because it was like optimistic or pessimistic, but because it was honest and he didn't sell AI as magic, he didn't dismiss it either. Instead, he really talked about where synthetic users genuinely help, where they quietly mislead teams, and why plausible insights can be more dangerous than obvious, wrong ones. And Julian has spent years working in research and product and research infrastructure, and that perspective really shows. So in this podcast episode, we talk about AI and user research, we talk about synthetic users, we talk about AI moderated interviews, we talk about biases and validation, and how the role of researchers is shifting from doing everything themselves to more orchestrating research across teams. So this is definitely not an episode about replacing research with AI, but I would rather describe it as about learning how to use these tools without losing the judgment, the context, and the responsibility that is so well needed. So if you work in UX, in research or product, and if you're trying to make sense of what AI actually means for your day-to-day work, this conversation is for you. So I would say, let's dive right in. Hi and welcome, Julian. So nice to have you in the Future of UX podcast.
Hey, hello. Thanks for having me.
Of course, super excited to have you. Since I saw your talk at the Future Product Days, I knew that I really wanted to have you in the podcast to talk with you about research, about synthetic users, about AI-generated interviews, about all of these new things that are coming up. And I definitely want to hear your thoughts about, all of these topics pretty much. Before we are diving in, Julian, could you give the listeners a little intro, share a bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I am a researcher specialized in research operations. So throughout my career, I've always been the first researcher or one of the first hires. So I always focus on building all the infrastructure and doing all the pipe work to establish research in companies, basically with the aim of helping companies make better decisions. And since last year, I joined a company called DuckDuckGo, which is, it's a search engine, a browser, and everything. It's a privacy-focused company. And I've been doing research for more than a decade now. I actually started in product. So I'm a product manager converted into researcher, which is not that common because it's usually the other way around. A lot of researchers are becoming PM now. So
And why did this happen? Why were you so fascinated about research that you switched?
Well, because the reason I got into product in the first place was I was reading at the time. Maybe you know this book is pretty old. I feel old when I say this, but Steve Blank's what everything 4 steps to epiphany, and he talked about like getting out of the building and doing customer discovery and talking to people and so on, understanding their needs, and that really resonated with me. And at some point, of course, I was into the whole PM stuff, but I was really leaning into that part, of understanding users, and from there I thought, wow, what kind of discipline has a strong focus on this? So I went to UX. I tried being a designer. I was not that successful. I took some courses on design just to see if I could make things work. Didn't happen. But then I started when I was transitioning. I got close to some service designers, and they were great, and they taught me a lot of stuff about research, and that's how I started in research. I said, well, great, I'm going to double down on understanding users now. So that's been my journey so far.
This is so cool. I really love that. Like the passion for users. This is the most important part when you design products, pretty much. This is like what glues everything together. This is the base for everything. If you understand your users, you will have a super successful product. So I think it's interesting to hear about the fascination that you got from that. I can totally relate. Um, so for how long are you working at research now?
And already a decade now,
Oh
this year
wow.
actually. And so a little bit more in tech, so 12 years in tech, but as a researcher, around a decade, yeah, like half of 2016, around
Long
that age.
time.
Actually, when I was moving to Germany, I was moving to Berlin by that time.
Nice.
So yeah.
Um, so a decade is a long time. I mean, around 10 years. What do you think has changed in the research landscape in the last decade?
Well, surprisingly, there are many things that have changed and many things that still haven't.
Mhm,
So I think research is still fighting some of the same fights it's been fighting in the last decade or even more, about people understanding what to use research for or why it's important to invest time, effort, and really put some thoughts or give some thoughts to research. Why is that important? I think this is still a fight that happens nowadays. Also in the last couple of years, many organizations kind of trimmed research teams, or even if you're, for example, if you're a designer, sometimes you're pushed to, focus on the design and leave the research part out, or like, can you cut corners and there?
mm,
So I think that's kind of the big discussion. And on top of that, we have something new like AI, and I think these
mhm,
two things are pretty much intertwined. So I think this pressure for using AI to accelerate or to maybe cut corners or maybe use it in a way so we can speed things up is also connected to this, like, we don't have time for research, we don't see that much value in research, we need to ship, we need to, all this is stemming from the same, in the end I think is there are different branches of the same root.
mhm.
So surprisingly, it might sound contradictory, but I think many things have changed, yet not that many have changed.
And what do you think AI has changed in the research process so far?
I think, like everything, like AI is just, it's a tool, right? Pro blaming the tool. So if you use a
Mhm.
hammer for preparing a salad, the problem is not the hammer. You should have used a spoon and maybe a fork. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I think in the case of AI, it has surfaced many of it certainly helped or is helping us in many ways, but also has surfaced many of the bad sides or many of the tricky sides of research, or maybe how research is perceived.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I think this was a wonderful summary, right? Like, this is a tool, it depends on how you use it. And I also really like the analogy of a hammer. It always depends for like which use case you use it. One thing that I am seeing more and more, and this is also what became so obvious to me when I went to Copenhagen, where you had the conference at the Future Product Days last year. During that conference, there were so many companies showcasing their AI research tool. And for me, this was fascinating. A tool for AI testing, a tool for SEO optimization, an AI tool for qualitative research, for synthetic users. They were like tons of research tools. Lots of the tools basically took over work that usually, would be researchers' work. So I'm curious to see how what's your take on all the tools and integration in the research process. Let's start with one topic that that's the most, controversial, which is synthetic users. You also talked about this in the talk at the Future Product Day, so I thought this was super, super insightful. So, what's your take on synthetic users? Do you think this brings value in the research process? Maybe you can also first explain a little bit of like what it is for everyone who hasn't heard about it.
Okay, great. Let's start. Well, let's start one step before, which is like when we talk about synthetic users, where there's a company, a brand called Synthetic Users. When we're not
Mhm.
talking about them, we're just talking about AI generated users in general, whether you generate them using GPT or whatever else you use. I think we're in a generic kind of conversation just to flag that right away because it can get confusing.
Perfect. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
well, these synthetic users or AI generated users are basically could be generated based on some content or some data sets that you feed an LLM with. So a way of doing it, you can do it like in what is called in context learning, so ICL, which is basically you open any of the chatbots of your preferences and you just like start pasting documents and using documents, and within that conversation or in that controlled context, that's where you can generate users. Like, well, based on this data, can you create different personas or different types or profiles inside that? That's one way of doing that. There's another way which is a bit more complex and needs a little bit of prompt engineering, and well, I actually did this with some engineering help. Is I couldn't do that alone, but when I was experimenting with this type of users, we basically lift up the hood and say, okay, great, how do we train the LLM using a specific data set that we were feeding, because it's not the same when you have your data on top of the knowledge the LLM already has versus training it with the things that you're feeding it with, right? So it's a slightly different approach, but basically the idea is the same, that based on some data, you train an LLM and you tell them, well, create users out of this. And then after you have those users, you use them as you would use any other user, right? So you can ask them questions, you can interview them, you can show them stuff and ask them your opinion. You can do many things with them. So the risk here is not we go back to the same. We'll probably go back to the same in all of the applications, right? It's like this is a tool. The tool itself is not the problem. The problem is how you use it. So I think there are many really interesting use cases for this, but at the same time, there are plenty of risks. Let me start with the good side of this. So I think having these users can be helpful when you use them as sparring partners. So imagine you are really early on in your process, right? I don't know, you want to polish a research protocol. You have a really, like, remember, I don't know if you remember, like balsamic kind of prototype, like really like grayscale, really even paper stuff, like that level of really early on, and you don't want to go and do research with real users yet, or you don't want to like do a full-blown project. You can go and take them for a spin and see what things might arise from there, and use that to polish your work, and then take it and like put it in front of real users afterwards. So it's kind of like a pre-stage where you can use these users. It's also great if you don't have access to users that often, especially, for example, in B2 cases. I don't know if you are you work in, I don't know, your the profile, your ICP, or your profile, or are bank managers, for example, bank managers in Switzerland. I don't know how easy it is to recruit them. It's like probably not. It's very, very hard. Maybe you interview like 3 a year, like something like that. So it's advisable. I mean, you can use the data that you have to create these users and somehow compensate for the complexity of your recruitment, but that's kind of like a real extreme case or a very, very edge case. And for me, the most coolest use of this AI generated users is for training non-researchers in doing research. That's for me the best. If you have any programs where you have, I mean, I'm thinking very from a researcher perspective, but if you're a designer or if you're a product manager or an engineer, maybe you're encouraged or you want to start talking to users more often, but you don't feel that confident about your skills, you can create this little user gym in your company, and you can create like, well, these are users, like AI generated users that resemble our users. Try asking questions, and then you see, start eliminating bias or leading questions and so on. So it's more like a training ground. This use for me is one of the most interesting one, because it can help. You have access to this gym 24/7. You don't need to, if you complement this with trainings and some documentation, you can have the whole organization conducting better research at some point, if that's what you're after. So these use cases are very, very promising, in my perspective at least. But then come the risks, and this is really the most controversial part, right? So these users, you're creating them based on data, right?
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, the answers that they might give you might not be as juicy and as useful as real human answers. So we did some experiments last year, and basically what I saw is that these synthetic answers or these AI generated answers were a bit more robotic. They were more like, well, I did A and then did B and then did C. Like everything happened. Tell me about the last time you did something, and the answer was really polished and everything went perfect. And the human answers, when we compare, we run the same interviews with AI generated users and with real users, and the human answers were more like, well, things happen, and it was a tough week for me, so I couldn't do this. I had this problem, so they were
I
more,
remember the
yeah.
example from when was the last time you did a workout, like what you shared in your talk, right? And the synthetic user said, oh, it was yesterday, 7 p.m. I did a 1 hour training. After that, I went to the shower, and tomorrow I will do another one. And the human was like, oh, I don't know. So I wanted, but then my kids got in the way, and then I don't know, I was tired. So I actually didn't do it. I just went to bed early or something like that. Which is, I think, like such a good example. I really needed to laugh when I saw that, because this is like so AI always wants to perform. They want to give the perfect answers. They don't want to fail. They don't know how it is to go to bed early because they're exhausted watching their kids all day. And I think it was super cool. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I
No,
really loved that in your talk. So I quickly wanted to jump in.
yeah, there are also some things in that regard, which is also like, especially when you do in context learning. So when you use the regular out of the box chatbot and you just like put stuff there, sometimes what you get is you get two flavors of this. Either you get the very pleasing AI, so like, oh yeah, this is great, this is a great idea, everything is fantastic, or you get the other one who always sees something that you could improve, right? So that also happens with the answers. But yeah, going back to the example, we had, like, from the get-go, we had very different answers, and the thing is that you can start tweaking the AI answers, right? You can then retrain the users and said, well, be more doubtful here, be more like, but at some point you're like, what are we even doing? It's like
Yeah.
we're just telling a machine how they should answer us, so we believe them. So it's like, well, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But but that's how it works, right? So that's one thing, the answers that you can get. Which is, as you said, if you're training is fine because you're not using that to make decisions. But if you're then trying to use this for decisions, well, it can end,
Tricky.
yeah, tricky to say the least, right?
And you just mentioned like the training data, and I'm super curious to hear how you actually train those synthetic users. Like you mentioned the example with the, I don't know, banking managers, and you have maybe 3 interviews, maybe a survey that you did. Would this be enough to train a synthetic users to get any kind of like decent answers that you could potentially use even as assumptions?
I would say no, but I'm
Yeah.
also biased because I'm always tempted to have more data, and the more data that we can have, the better. So I mean, that in that particular case, but at the same time, it's like, what can you do? That's the data
Yeah.
that you have. So I think in those edge cases call for a very specific reasoning, right? We need to kind
Mhm.
of evaluate the trade-offs. Is that, well, this is all the data we got. These users are expensive, hard to get. We take months to recruit them. How can we, compensate that? Maybe some of the decisions that you make, because in the end it's all about decisions, right? It's like, okay, some of the decisions about, I don't know, designing a product, well, maybe you can do a little bit of heuristics and
Mhm.
competitors and the data that you have, and in the end you do like your own patchwork of data to make decisions. But if you ask me in isolation if this data is enough, probably not.
Yeah.
um
And another thing that you mentioned, I think, was like super interesting, like this telling the AI how to respond. I'm wondering, are we adding more biases into the synthetic users by saying that? Because I don't know how the stereotypical banking managers, maybe those are people who are like super structured. If they say they go to the gym, they go. Even if they are tired, they go. They don't go to bed early because, I don't know, this is the kind of personality that is a good fit for these kind of positions. So I think, I don't know, I don't know how much prompting you can make it better or actually worse, and integrating our own biases. What are your thoughts? What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one thing to add here, and this is also the nature of how these things work, especially if you're using it like the canned version, right? Like when I mean with canned version, I will keep saying canned version, but it's like go to what like your preferred AI.com. That's what I mean with canned version, right? It's like you're not using a local version, or you're not using you're not opening the cables and everything. So just like the one that everybody can access right now and start dropping information. When you do that also, if you are asking about a particular profile, the AI, what we do is like based on all the information that it has about similar stuff and whatever it can find on the internet, it will fill in the blanks. So in the end, it might seem it might seem realistic or it might seem useful, but then there is where the tricky part is, because in the end, it's using a lot of data that is not really yours, ethics aside, but like it's not really yours, and it's like, well, I don't know if these are bank, because maybe the AI is filling with, I don't know how bank managers in the UK behave, and maybe they're different from the Swiss ones, and they're like a stereotype. Well, usually banking managers have this profile and this profile and this profile. They play golf and they ride BMWs, and then so like they start making that. But like how much of a stereotype is that? How much they are like putting stuff like in an average rather than your specific use case or your specific user, right? So it's a Pandora box there. You can open it and there are like so many things you can start pulling. So the tricky thing with this is that AI will give you an answer. If you have this user, they will give you an answer. So if it sounds convincing, that's the risk. And probably the biggest risk or the largest risk here is like people thinking this is good enough or this is trustworthy enough for them to make decisions on strategy, on product design, on product altogether. So it's a little bit of guesswork if you if you think deeply about it, right? It's like this is not strong enough, in my opinion, at least, unless you do like a really deep and you have like a lot of information, which I mean is also valid. If you have hundreds of interviews and surveys and so on, and you train your users, I could be more convinced about that. But I'm going to the everyday case, right? It's like people saying, well, just like I will use whatever LLM for this and see what answers I get back.
So I actually have a question for you. So when I shared that we are doing the interview today on Instagram, someone texted me and said that their company is working with, I wasn't sure if it's syntheticusers.com or if it's like another tool, but with some kind of synthetic user product, basically. She is a designer/researcher and is super hesitant. I think she said the results are okay-ish, but she is not 100% sure of like how to deal with the results of those interviews now, and how to behave and how to consult basically the design team as a researcher with the insights of a tool she never really wanted to use, but now needs to because it's their company policy now. What would you recommend?
That's a very tricky situation,
Yeah,
I'd
right.
say. Well, first of all, I don't know. Without going into the details of the tool, like whatever tool it is, I think the most important thing, and it's connected to my previous point, is like whatever is built, using AI, what is the source data that is being built with? Because if you have, I'm just talking about using how I created users and this kind of experience. Maybe this company, I don't know. I'm just like talking without really knowing. But maybe if they offer a tailor-made service with their data and so on, and they craft users based on that, those users would be more trustworthy. I mean, as I
Mhm.
said, if you have 300 interviews and surveys and so on, and you have like years of data, then well, maybe those users do resemble
Yeah.
how your real users are. Can you combine this with old school, so to say? I don't want to call it old school because it sounds like this is the new school, and there's like, well, but like classic research. So can you combine that with doing research with real users?
Mhm.
Maybe you can then see how much they differ.
Yeah.
uh,
I think this is a good point, actually. Such a good tip. Like, still using users to validate the insights, if this is through testing, and then also compare results, compare the insights, and then also show that to the design team, right? Like, if
yeah.
things are not matching up, then, or if maybe they also find out that the synthetic user is actually great because they used great data, and it's super, super helpful, a wonderful starting point, and they only need real users for testing. So I think wonderful. Thanks for the tip. I think super helpful. Not always easy because there's so much change right now, and especially researchers need to adapt a lot to different tools and services. Another interesting trend that I'm seeing are AI generated interviews. No, not generated interviews, AI conducted interviews. So when the AI conducts the qualitative interview for you. What are your thoughts on this? There are a ton of tools out there who you can use for that. Have you used these kind of tools? What are your thoughts about it? Tell us.
I think I'm less skeptical of this one,
Mhm.
and I'm more optimistic. I think there's a lot of potential for improvement. I don't know, in the last couple of months, I've seen companies like launching new stuff and polishing this and, taking it to the next level. So I'm optimistic here. And sorry, this I sound like a broken record, but in the end, it's a tool. So like, if you use it correctly, it works. And if you use it the wrong way, it won't work. And,
How do
and
you
here it's
use
the
it
same, right?
correctly?
So,
How do you use it correctly? What would you say?
all right, as of now, I think a really good use of these AI moderators would be a sort of an open-ended questions at scale. So
Mhm.
basically, open-ended questions are those like, well, instead of like in a survey, instead of options, it would be like something that people need to talk about, and maybe talk about like for a minute or 2 minutes or something like that. If you have like a handful of those, I think AI moderators can help you out, especially to get started and to frame the rest of your work, without going into too much nerdy detail about research. But sometimes we think that research is one thing. So, well, we do interviews, that's the research. In the end, what we
Yeah.
do is that we need to find this out, right? And for
Yeah.
that, we might use 5 things. We might say, well, this is a decision we need to make,
Yeah.
these are the things we need to learn, and for that we use a survey, we use interviews, we use secondary research, we use heuristics and so on. So in the end, it's patchwork.
Yeah.
If you're framing your research and I say, well, I have these questions and maybe can help me frame the problem better and go into the, I don't know, a round of qualitative research more confidently, I can use the moderators and have them ask 5, 6 questions for me, and I will use that data to frame the rest of my project and use it as one more data point. So that's a really good use, especially if you want to do it like at scale. With scale, I mean hundreds of interviews in just a
Yeah.
week. That you wouldn't be able to do that. But those interviews maybe last 10 minutes, something like
Mhm.
that. Um, I'm a bit more skeptical of running a full interview, like a long-winded interview with moderators, like 1 hour conversation. First of all, because users tend to be less engaging
Yeah.
with an AI moderators. It's like everything, right? If you call support numbers, like, do you want to talk to the machine or you want to talk to the human to solve your problem? The similar thing happens with AI. We did some experiments. What I mean, we a group, we have engineers, designers, and researchers like outside our work, which is like got together and we played around with this. Um, so each of us took the results in their own field and they're talking about different things. But what we saw is that people were like less uh, engaging, and there was no empathy, there was no connection, right? Like now I see, for
Yeah.
example, I see you, you're smiling, or you're nodding, or you look like this, or you look like, yeah, you're happy. I can see what, and I can feel your emotions somehow, and kind of like get the vibe, right? When it's an AI moderator, I could be like, well, great, blah blah blah, and off to the next thing, right? For some minutes it's fine, but
Mhm.
the longer it gets, the less. So what we saw is like interviews moderated by AI were around 20% shorter than the ones with human. Not because humans were insisting that more, but also because the people were like the answers were longer.
Yeah. I mean, that makes so much sense, and I can relate so much because I was a participant in a study of an AI conducted research, and it was for me super fascinating to go through that process and be interviewed from an AI. I must say I was like positively surprised of how good the questions were phrased. They were all open ended, as you mentioned. They were all like really on point, really sharp questions, but the whole empathy was missing. At one point, I was talking about that I was stressed about something and I felt really bad, and then the AI said, "This must be difficult. Okay, now tell me about." This was I was like, this is crazy. I mean, I didn't want pity or something, but they kind of like, "Oh, this must be difficult. Tell me a bit, like, why are you so sad about this?" This is what a real researcher, like a human, would say. Like, "Oh, now go deeper on that emotion." So I thought, like, fascinating. Some things are good, some things not so much. But I think, like in the future, maybe when they are analyzing more the expressions, facial expressions, do you think like this could become part of that, or do you think this will be only human?
Yeah, I think at some point they will improve. I think
Yeah.
both will coexist at some point, and I think you
Mhm.
will use some times you will use the moderator for one thing. I think this is not just like a binary thing. It's not just like black or white. It's just more like, well, depending on the study, depending on how things go. I think for me, one of the things, and this is maybe connects with also other AI usage, is connecting these moderators to like a larger pool of knowledge. And what I mean with this is like what happens usually with the moderators is that they like to leverage the larger context.
Mhm.
So if I was interviewing now about, let's say, product A, I'm a researcher at my company. Let's imagine I'm the only researcher at the company. I know that the team is thinking about product A, product D, and product F. And
Yeah.
I know what product manager F is thinking about doing. And I know I have like a 360. I know what's important for the company. I know what the goals are. So maybe in the same interview for product A, I just see that there's some, potential for more questions. And I start asking you a little bit all over the place.
Um,
And I get insights for more than one thing.
yeah.
And that's what so far AI moderators do not leverage enough. This understanding of, well, the company wants to go this way. These are the priorities for the company now or the team. I should ask this because the participant said this in the interview. I will also ask if they're interested in this or if they, I don't know, play around based on what I know. But this is leveraging the context, and the moderators are not there. If we start seeing more connection with repositories or I don't know, like task management tools and so on, maybe we start seeing this happen. I really don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
at this point, I don't know what to expect about all this. Like, well, maybe they do, maybe they
Mhm.
don't.
Yeah, I mean, I could totally see that at some point you basically input your roadmap and the meeting notes that you had with all your different stakeholders, just like as background information, pretty much. But like, I think we don't know. Um, what do you think does the future of research looks like, especially for, I know that there are a lot of researchers currently listening to this podcast episode. So they want to prepare themselves for what's ahead of them, to prepare for the delegation that's about to come. What should they do? How do you see the future for research in UX?
Well, to be honest, the future of researchers, I've been talking about this even outside AI. So I have to mix both in the end because they're intertwined. I think the role of researchers has been moving and will keep on moving towards orchestrators, and AI is accelerating this.
Hmm.
So before or not so long ago, and even still today, researchers are more like, well, I need to learn this, and I go and I learn, and that's pretty much I deliver the results, and we can deliver better or bad or faster. And it was pretty much linear in that sense. And especially in context where you are part of a small team or you're the only one, you need to change the approach. And basically is, how do you leverage data coming from different parts and people, different roles conducting certain types of research? How do you leverage that and combine that and put everything in a way that's, you build all the pipe work, and you build all the cables to connect research throughout the company. And I think what AI is bringing today is the opportunity to also there are risks, as I said, with AI generated users being used the wrong way. You have risks about using this the wrong, like with everything. But once we establish some war rails there, and also once companies who try that and then say, well, this is not really what our users were thinking, this is what the AI said our users might think, like once we get the pendulum goes back the other way, I think we'll be like, well, how can we responsibly, ethically, and safely implement research in an organization? And researchers will be the ones orchestrating all that. In the
Yeah.
end, we'll have more output, more data, and we just need to solve the distribution problem, right? This is what researchers, I think, will be doing in the long run. Of course, they will be still tackling like large scope research and stuff that is more complex and you need different things. But in the end, there's a lot of how do we help the organization make sense of all the data that we gather, and how do we get it to the right places and the right people so they can make better decisions? I think this is where the whole research field will be going at some point. And AI is just accelerating that.
Yeah. Makes so much sense. All the orchestration, and something that I think we can definitely look forward to is having more data points, because we are coming from a situation or a point where there were so much discussion of like, do we even need research? To now, yeah, we understand finally we need it. To hopefully in the future, we need research and we need lots of data points. So I think this can be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and also if you think about it, there are also certain impact of AI in other roles tasks. So, for example, I don't know much about this, so I'm not gonna go full into the topic. But you as a designer, maybe you know this much better than I do. It's like you have a lot of things that you can, I don't know, you have cursor, you have lovable, you have like a lot of stuff going on, and I don't know how much of the designer work will change. I don't know, there's some
A
stuff would
lot.
be streamlined or accelerated. So at some point, imagine, or same with PMs, maybe you get some stuff that's streamlined. I was talking to product operations folks, and they were telling me like, yeah, we can like grow our backlog really quickly with this and that. So if you then start cutting time from, yeah, I don't know, 15% of the designer time is now free because of these automations. 20% of the PM time is free because of this and that. Once you start cutting all that time, what's the excuse for not doing research then? Because always the excuse was like, research will slow us down, we don't have time for research, and so on. So if you use that time for then you can, at some point, like we're all making decisions on what we're
Yeah.
doing. And I think this is also the opportunity. We might be able to do research faster and more seamlessly. And other roles will have the chance to be more involved in research too at some point, or at least in making sense of the data, or putting those insights in practice, in their particular fields. So I think this is a very convoluted time for researchers. A lot of people are scared, but I think probably it's my fault. I'm always very optimistic about things, but I think this could be a great opportunity if we understand how to use it correctly.
I really like that. And I think this makes so much sense. Um, be- because as you mentioned, right, it's lowering the entry height pretty much. Now it's so easy to get started somehow with research that hopefully people understand, or stakeholders understand that you get a lot of value from it, even from those tiny things, and then invest even more. Because what I have seen also with my project is that it's so difficult. How do we even start with research? Do we need a proper researcher now? We need to set up a study. We need to blah, 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 blah. It was so much money and so much effort. And then they decided, okay, let's not do it now, do it later or something like that. And those were all the discussions. And now it's easier because we can say, we can start with an AI conducted interviews, just like slow, starting, getting some first insights, and then continuously integrating more and more so that no one feels overwhelmed with too much research, but more like granularly integrating it. This is what I could see also with the clients that I'm working with. Yeah. Super cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think in the end, I think the researcher will the role of helping teams separate or differentiate good from bad. So the risk is, if you've never done research before, you probably don't know what a good interview looks like or what a good answer looks like. So you're easily tricked. So part of the researcher role will be more like, well, this is how this thing should go. This is what a good interview looks like. If you use AI, for example, you can use AI to create question banks so the rest of the team can use, right? You can create something that then designers can go and use, like, well, how do I craft a usability testing protocol? And then you have vetted by a researcher with the research like approved stamp. You can get like, well, these are questions that you can use. And I think that's going to be, I think the researcher role will kind of be a hybrid at some point between research and research operations. But I think if we see it, and if companies start seeing the value there, I think companies that still haven't hired a researcher will start hiring the first one at some point. I think my prediction, and this is just guesswork, this is just opinion. I think that we are past this era where you had like teams of 30, 40 researchers in organizations, right? Especially large ones. But also, what's going to change is, like, still the majority of companies don't have a researcher. It's not such a common position, right? So maybe this shift helps open the first researcher roles, if we position ourselves as these orchestrators and making sense and being the standard for knowledge and helping other teams chip in and collaborate into the research game.
Do you have any resources that you can share with the listeners? Anything that they could maybe read or learn if they want to become more these orchestrators?
Well, there are many books you can read. Some of them are maybe more research specific that comes to mind. You can check if you want to learn a bit more about this operations part. There's the Research Ops Community. There's Kate Tows's book, Research That Scales. Those, I think, are very good resources. I'm actually working on a book as we speak. It's probably gonna launch in May. It's about this. It's basically how non-researchers can start building the operations, like the practice. So carving time out of your schedule to do some research and doing this and getting the buy-in and setting the minimum viable practice, so to say. So that's, it is no problem. I swear, it's like, this is it's a resources I'll put together at some point.
Nice.
But I think those two are really good. You also have some research operations podcasts here and there. Then you have
a podcast.
Yeah, I have a podcast too. Yeah, sorry. I promote I promote the thing I haven't done, but I haven't. Yes.
Yeah, you also have your own podcast. I will definitely link everything in the show notes, the books that you mentioned, your podcast, your LinkedIn, so people can reach out. If you have a waiting list for your book as well, so that might be interesting, right? Like for people who also designers who would like to dive into research. That's super cool. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. Any other resources that you would like to share?
But the podcast is called Finders to Builders.
Finders to Builders. Yeah.
That connects to what I just said. I think my prediction is that we're gonna stop being just finders. People who get data. And we will start becoming more builders, right? How do we build knowledge infrastructure? How do we build a system that helps the company inform the decisions that we all need to make in our day to day? And how can we de-risk that? So, yeah, it all connects to the.
Nice. Wonderful. Julian, thank you so much for sharing the resource and also your insights. So interesting. I think the research field is such a fascinating area right now because there's so much happening with AI, and I really love your approach of like using AI as a tool, implementing it where it makes sense, seeing how the role shifts. I think this is so nice and so wonderful, so much better than like avoiding AI or saying like, oh, this is evil, we shouldn't use it. But I think you have a wonderful strategy of really understanding of like what works, what doesn't. You're critical but also cautious with the new tools, and I really love that. Thank you so much for sharing that with our wonderful community here. I really appreciate that, and yeah, hope that we will have a chance to chat soon. Thank you so much, Julian, for being here.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me. Had a great time. Bye bye.